Unmuted. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Bob. Thanks for inviting me. Delighted to be here. And in this crazy world of 2020 that we're in right now, I don't think too many people are getting on planes and go flying abroad and doing service yet. But my hope is that all the good things that come with international travel and all the good things that come with exposing um, our minds to different ways of being and learning, and to going out and learning how to serve. I really hope that all those good things come back. And one of the things that I see as a moment in time here in 2020 is to really like a lot of things went on pause, and then when we relaunch, we can rethink, right? And so my hope is that things like international service, which had some fundamental flaws in the ways that some programming was doing it. Not that I don't think that applies to what what basically what I think applies is that people are doing work without doing the thinking before. And what this pause is letting us do is have these type of conversation, do some thinking. So when we get on that plane, whenever that happens, for those of us who haven't been on one in a while, we'll have put that thinking in so that we can do things just that little bit better on the other side of all this. So as Bob said, there is a learning service book that I helped co-author with 3 other lovely humans, Claire Bennett, the late Zahara Heckscher, who was an amazing woman, and Joe Collins. So we wrote this book from our own experiences of making a ton of mistakes. And that's really the main thing I want to share with you, is that all of the, hold on, I'm realizing I'm sharing this one. All of the lessons that I'm trying to share with you right now are actually my own mistakes that I have made. I shared with you last year's version versus the one I updated.
That's okay. That's all right.
Where is it? Let's see.
While you're doing that and finding that, I'm going to jump in and just say quickly that for folks that are thinking about their own programs, as oriented as their work is toward getting on airplanes, and shoulder to shoulder anyway, it inspired us to start a program called In Your Backyard, awesome. which is really applying these principles to that literal concept of working right in your own community. So Daniela, it's been a kind of a seed of growth in shoulder to shoulder, and I think that can be for the panelists as well.
Great. A brilliant man that I knew who worked at Antioch University in California, in LA, did programming where he realized he's like just around the corner from our school is an area called Koreatown, and he's like, most of our students never enter there, and just around the other corner from our school is a kind of a drop-off pickup point for day laborers, many of whom spoke Spanish as a first language, right? And so he started to do that type of programming of saying, we can literally go 4 blocks from our school, right? And be immersed in a learning service experience, right? And so I think that, like you said, Bob, is the opportunity right now, is to say, actually, there's neighbors of ours who live a totally different life than we might in our university, in our workspace, or our, wherever, our home, and maybe speak a different language, maybe have a different cultural lens, maybe have a different set of world experiences based on biases that are happening towards them, based on how laws are treating them, based on how the world works in favor of or not in favor of them, right? So how do we just even take these principles and, like you said, in our backyard, start to ask better questions and meet different people, and especially as educators, when I the introductions, a lot of you I know are running programs at schools. This is our opportunity, right? It's like, we don't need to get on a plane to be exposed to different cultures. We don't need to get on a plane to serve. And sometimes when we get on a plane to serve, it's a little too easy because we can just get back on the plane and think we've done our part, right?
Exactly.
Whereas the stuff that's right next door to us, nobody wants to try and help the homeless situation at the end of the road because we know it's complicated.
Yes.
We're like, oh my gosh, it's so complicated. There's mental health issues. There's, like structural issues with housing and costs, and laws of what's allowed to get built or not get built. There's so much complexity that we sometimes just are like, well, if I get on a plane and I go to a quote unquote poor country and I think I can just do this service and be done, I never have to engage with that complexity, right? So there's so many opportunities to change our thinking. So like I said, these lessons are my mistakes. A lot of the lessons that I'm sharing are based around, or at least started for me with 6 years that I spent in Cambodia. Prior to going to Cambodia, I had done many volunteer travel trips in Thailand and Nepal and in the Philippines and many different places, but I'd never stuck around, right? I did it a week, I did a trip. It was the best week of my life at the time. I loved it. And then I got to Cambodia, helped build schools, ran a volunteer travel company, brought people to travel with us. And at first had those same beautiful experiences. And then having stuck around longer, started to realize, wow, maybe this all isn't as easy as I thought. Maybe we're not causing as much good as I thought, and we're actually sometimes involved in causing harm, right? And so the lessons that my kind of passion is to share lessons so that others don't have to make the same mistakes that I did. We're all going to make mistakes. It doesn't mean we can do this perfectly, but hopefully we can avoid some of the ones that are easier to avoid. So this is just kind of it's unfortunately not a joke, it's a truth, but it's an example of a volunteer trip that went so wrong in all directions that it really helped us think about what could go wrong. And this was a volunteer trip in Cambodia run by an Australian company, a for-profit travel provider, volunteer travel provider. They partnered with a local nonprofit that I knew, and that's how I ended up coming to visit this project while it was going on and saw these things. So all of it, here we go. So there was poor pre-planning. It was rainy season, and these students were meant to be painting a school, and they were put up in tents on the school grounds, and all the tents flooded, and all the local community members had to volunteer to help these poor, wet teenagers, get dry and get other places to sleep, and very, very poorly planned. And the whole time the students were saying, well, the reason, we paid a lot of money for a trip, but at least, they're putting us up in these really cheap places because more of our money is going to the nonprofit. But actually, none of their money went to the nonprofit. The website said that a percentage of it did, but actually the entire project for the school and the painting and everything was funded by a third-party foundation in Australia that I was also connected to and knew about. And so they recognized that there was no transparency. So these students thought that they were living in, this muddy tent to help, to save money. And in reality, it wasn't true. They painted the school with indoor paint on the outside. In rainy season, it had to get painted again. And they were wet and tired, so they didn't paint very well. And when I showed up, they were all wearing bikinis, loud music, and drinking beer in a really rural community where alcohol is considered taboo in the sense that it's usually associated with domestic violence. There's kids running around underfoot and lots of drunk teenagers, as well as men in the community who'd come to enjoy the beer as well. So that was, one example. And the last piece was that the wrong people were put in charge. The for-profit company had hired a man who was running something called the Cambodian Orphan Fund, who the next year was sent to prison for sexually abusing several minor boys in his care. And it turns out he had already been known to be a pedophile in his home country of the UK, and was just allowed to run an organization in Cambodia. when he was there. So this is all heavy and yucky and icky stuff. And I'm sorry that that's how I'm starting out, but it needs to be said that this is a true example of kind of a confluence of a lot of bad things. But unfortunately, every single piece of what I've just shared with you, I've seen in many, many trips. And those students who went on this trip knew none of this. They went home thinking that their money was being used to fund this nonprofit, that they had, sacrificed, by sleeping outside to help, and maybe like went through the year thinking, gosh, I did this great thing. And of course it's not their fault, right? It's not their fault. They were sold something that wasn't true. And that is often what is happening in poorly planned volunteer travel. And their teachers and their educators and the people who supported it also were thinking they were doing something great. And part of the problem is that a key piece to the last part of that problem is that we can't treat children as tourist attractions. So a lot of the other things I'm going to share are kind of best practices. And to me, and this is a black and white issue of of something we cannot be doing. And we cannot be doing orphanage tourism. Children are not tourist attractions. And what you see right now, if you search for like volunteer in an orphanage, you'll find websites that'll say like 50% discount on our trip, right? Sign up, right? And this is not, people are like signing up often, most of the time, hopefully with very good intentions, obviously sometimes with negative intentions. But those of us who do this type of work, and I volunteered at a bunch of orphanages before I got to Cambodia. So once again, these are my mistakes. People are doing it with good intentions, leaving thinking they did something good and not recognizing that either A, they're raising money for corrupt institutions that are keeping children looking poor, because I've heard many travelers say, I'm going to give my money to the poorest looking orphanage because they need me more. And B, that children are getting attached and having attachment issues and are sometimes being bought from families or being taken from families under false pretexts. A lot of times in Cambodia, in rural communities, orphanage owners come to the family and say, we know you can't afford to feed all your kids. We'll take the two youngest. No, not that one. The really cute one over here. And we will send them to our orphanage and we will treat them well. And we have foreigners who are going to teach them English. And we have all this money raised from foreign communities. So we'll feed them well. And this is the dark side of something that is happening in the sector that not enough people are talking about. And fortunately, it's starting to become more aware that people are starting to pull orphanage tourism from their offerings. So would this be okay if it was happening in my community? That's really the question to ask. Would this be okay? Could anybody just walk into my kid's school, my kid's nursery, play with my kid? I have a 4-year-old. Would this be okay? Right? That's what we need to ask. Okay, so not only are poorly planned service programs failing the communities when they're poorly planned, like we just heard, but they can fail the students themselves, right? And so the way I view this is kind of 3 things. It's either poverty overload, which is when students get sent off on some of these trips that have no structure, no education, no handholding, no teaching, no learning component, they sometimes land and they're like, this is so overwhelming. There is, if they think in systems already, they realize, gosh, all these systems are broken. And I thought I was going to help and save by, just doing my teaching. And there's corruption, there's all these things going on. And I am done. I need to go home. This is too much, right? And no one was helping them work through a process and to connect in ways that might have been positive for both themselves and the community. Another is failure overload. Like they thought that they could help. They were told that they could help, and actually they recognize that their service isn't what they thought it was. And then they're like, why did I sign up for this? And the last is savior overload, which I just say is like that group that we talked about. They left thinking they did the world's greatest thing, and in reality, the way that we change the world is not in our 1-week trip. It's how we live, how we travel, how we give, how we vote, how we act for the other, 300 days of the year, not the 65 we're traveling, right? And so they left thinking they've done their part, pat themselves on the back, and they haven't changed their life or their attitude or their thoughts, right? Okay, so how and why is this happening? The model itself is broken. People think that this is how volunteer travel is done. The community has a project, they go out and they say, hey world, we need volunteers, and then volunteers come and do that thing, right? And in reality, it's different than that. Oftentimes, a volunteer travel organization is selling a trip, and they say, we're selling a trip for these dates or this time in this place. And then they go out and they say, who needs us? Who needs us? We've got a bunch of people coming. And this is what we did when we ran a volunteer travel company at the beginning in Cambodia. I tell the school, wait, no, don't put that fence up yet. I've got, 20 people coming in 3 weeks, and they have nothing else that they can do to help. So you need to wait because I need my people to put up that fence, right? This is what I was doing, right? Or, oh, well, really, these students need to learn Khmer and the local language and writing. But since our people don't speak Khmer, we'll just stop school for 2 days and teach Spanish and yoga and do some dance parties, because that's what our group can do. And so what's often also happening is that sometimes the community or the group is saying, oh, well, we don't need that fence or that dance party, but you'll give us money, and we do need money for things. So fine, we'll let you send your people, and our kids will miss 2 days of curriculum, because you're paying us, right? And sometimes that money is going to a good thing, and sometimes that money is going into someone's pocket along the way. All right, so if we are constantly focused on creating experiences for students while overlooking the cause, let me give you an example. I had teachers write to me and say, dear Daniela, we know you run an organization in Cambodia. We have students who would like to come the 3rd week of March during spring break. We want to give them an experience of a project that's complete from start to finish, so they have a sense of, of accomplishment at the end of their week, right? And, can you provide this type of volunteer opportunity for us? And that's, instead we should be saying, how do we expose our students to the reality that change is hard, change is sometimes slow, that things, that they have to be learners as well as helpers. This isn't just about, because they're from a wealthy country, they get to be the saviors. No, actually, in reality, the real thing all these teachers are asking is, how do I help my students be really good people when they grow up? How do I help my students just be better humans, care about things? How do I help them serve in their life? Great. You want to do that? Then they need to not think they're saviors when they get on, not necessarily get off the plane and say, hi, I'm here to learn, because actually I don't know enough about urban poverty or, the impacts of environmental degradation in your community. And actually by learning about it, I might then be motivated to do things that are way more important than building this fence for the rest of my life. It might influence what I study in university. It might influence my grad program. It might influence, how I vote, where I donate, how I think about change, right? And that's our opportunity as educators. That's our opportunity, is to help inspire young people to get involved ways well beyond the week that they get to be with us, the month, whatever that looks like. Okay, so it means we can't seek out easy and fast solutions, Bandaid solutions. This is a quote from a book called Rethinking Short-Term Missions. Americans always want to paint things. They want to paint buildings. So we have a building, we let them paint. Usually you have to repaint the building after the Americans leave. They don't do a very good job, right? This is the reality, right? So I started a nonprofit based on the wrong things, giving stuff away. How did the nonprofit change? So after some time, we built a bunch of schools, gave away t-shirts and books and bikes and all these things. We realized that the reality is if we wanted to impact change for the long term, it would be investing time in people. So the nonprofit still exists. It has an amazing Cambodian director and team, and they run leadership programs for youth, and they run kind of like job fairs and something we call the Dream Management Program, which is basically like exposing young Cambodian students to Cambodian role models so that they understand, if I want to be a doctor, this is what I have to do. If I want to be a teacher, this is what I have to do. And then there's scholarships to university and also 2-year degree programs, like if you want to be a lead bricklayer or if you want to be work in tourism. So programs along with leadership development. And that shift took us just some time to realize, actually, it's not just the things, right? These are different community meetings and community support work that was happening while I was there. And the tour company changed too. The tour company used to build buildings, build fences, like I talked about. And while the travel components still might include some components of like getting your hands dirty, the key part of the tours are development education, which is that we walk away sometimes with more questions than answers, but definitely with a better sense of development, what's happening, what's working, what's not, what questions do I need to ask before I start giving money away or giving time away, right? So that those who travel with us say, it's not how we can save the world in a week, it's what we do with the rest of the year. Okay, so I'm probably over my time already. I'll go for a few more minutes, Bob. Is that okay?
Sure.
So vocabulary we use, I think, is important to think about. If you are called a volunteer, you then think there needs to be beneficiaries, right? If you go into it thinking you are volunteering, you then think you need to create change. If you go into thinking you are on a learning journey, right? Then it doesn't mean you can't also contribute positively, but you don't need to be the savior, right? And there's also terms like, I'm from the village of Briarcliff Manor in New York. No one has ever called me a villager, right? There's terms that we use that put us in these positions of power unintentionally sometimes. So we really need to check our vocabulary, right? We're not volunteering to help villagers, right? We are learning as we travel so that we can be better people and we can find ways to contribute, right? So instead of volunteering, people move towards a model of service learning. And like Bob said, we like to call it learning service, which is saying we have to learn how to serve. Instead of getting off the plane, hi, I'm here to help you. It's hi, I'm here to learn from you how I might be of help now or in the future, right? And the other component of that that's sometimes overlooked is that its personal and global development are entirely interlinked. You cannot just put stuff out into the world. It's about changing ourselves too, right? And if we're not willing to look inside and be like, gosh, that was like a biased term. I was using villagers before. Why? Like, I wasn't trying to harm anyone, but let me think about that. And how do I shift that? And what other terms am I using, right? And how am I implicitly, how am I connected to this problem? Is there, who am I in this power dynamic, right? And as educators, those are the lenses. That's what we can hold. So this is just the book goes through this learning, the things that you can do to adopt a learning mindset, what kind of research you might do before you decide, do I even want to go abroad and volunteer? Do I want to go on a learning journey? Do I want to go on an exchange program? Do I want to just learn a language? What is it that I want to do? And then if you do choose to go abroad, what kind of mindsets would be helpful? How do you do self-reflective action? And then the rest of your life is really the opportunity. How do I translate my experiences abroad into my day-to-day lives? So that's me. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer more questions and share more thoughts. Thank you.
Okay. Right, great. Thanks so much, Daniela, for that presentation and for getting us started. I just made a quick note. A couple things that you said, which was so resonated with me, and I think can be so important for all of us in planning well. And one is the question of, I am here to learn, and put that into a form of a question of what are we here to learn?
Yep.
And again, the idea maybe for some of us is to getting on planes and so on. It begins to become maybe abstract a little bit. But I think you can ask that question of why do we want to go to the local food pantry? What is our purpose? Why are we going to the local women's shelter? So on. What are we thinking about? And what are the learning objectives that we are thinking about in terms of? And it was interesting, when you were talking about development, teaching kids about development, I actually thought you were going to talk about the development of kids, human development. Okay. And I think that too can be first in line when all of us are thinking about planning these programs. How is the experience going to interact with where kids are developmentally? Because I am suspicious of education, and I am suspicious that so many of these programs have been designed to enhance, if you will, the resume of students. I'm suspicious of that. And this idea that relationship between personal development and global and I see we're all of the globe, so global means our backyard as well. But to see those as inextricable, I think is a place where schools can start and say, look, if we're really honest, if we're really serious about developing young people as citizens of the world, then we have the resources right here. And so thank you so much. And it really has me thinking as well as in terms of the work we do with Shoulder to Shoulder. And I really appreciate that. But let's open it up. We've got people, I know so many people on this panel that are doing great work and are thinking deeply about this. And let's open it up to the group.
So John wrote a question around what can we do in the pandemic. Do you want me to hop in there or someone else?
Yeah, I however, yeah, you can do that. Sure.
So one thing, a quote I didn't share that our book is based around this one definition of the Vajra. The Vajra is a Mahayana Buddhist symbol. I actually think I have one in my bag. Let me see. Somewhere. No, maybe not. Oh, there it is. It's there, can you see it? It's kind of like a whole bunch of figure eights that like interloop, right? And one definition of this symbol is action without learning is selfishness. Learning without action, no, got it backwards. Action without learning is ignorance. Learning without action is selfishness, right? So action without learning, me getting off the plane in Cambodia and be like, I'm from a rich country, therefore I have a responsibility to help you, even though I know nothing about education or Cambodia or your language or your history, anything, but I'm going to just take action. Okay. That's ignorance, right? And learning without action, if I just sit around in Oxford in a tower and I learn and I write and I'm not actually trying to influence change, well, that's selfishness, right? And so this is this constant balance, right? The problem is when we give students, like I've seen some schools give students credit if they do a summer trip that is volunteer travel. They get extra credit. But if they go just on a learning journey, they don't. Okay, we need to change that. If your school does that, change that policy. That is a wrong policy, right? And so it is constant action and learning and action. This is the Vajra. And so there's moments where we say, okay, now we're investing in us, not just so that we can sit around and be selfish and read books. It's so that when we do take action, it is better informed, right? And so one thing that we can do in this pandemic time, is read about development best practices, both personal, but in that case I'm specifically meaning international development. We could have these debates and conversations, right? There's an example of what we often do with students that we're working with is we say, there are some students from Rwanda and they really want to help Colorado, and they heard about these fires and they don't speak English, but they're coming to help you. And, you know, design a project for them. Like, how are they going to help your community, right? And the students have, like, you know, they race and they're trying to do this, develop this thing, and they have to present it to the, you know, and just to recognize how ridiculous some of what we do with our students is, right? These are the types of things I think we can be doing with our students now, so that we create these debates and conversations and better inform how we act on the other side of this.
Yeah. So much thinking to be done, right? But
Danielle,
jump in or put your hands up or whatever. Yeah.
Hey, Lori.
I had put a question in the chat, and just curious, maybe you don't know. The communities or populations that were receiving outreach prior to the pandemic, and then due to the pandemic are no longer receiving outreach. Do you have any pulse on how some of those populations and communities are doing? Because it'd be interesting to see the difference, whether the service was a positive experience for the population or not, and if they're functioning well without those services.
These are great questions. My colleague Claire Bennett would be way better poised to answer some of this, but for years she and I, and still she to this day, have been really involved in this kind of anti-orphanage tourism movement. So way before the pandemic, these are the questions that we would also get. You know, you have lots of orphanages, child care centers that are reliant on and have designed themselves to be reliant on foreign donations, right? And so the transitions, you know, COVID kind of forced transitions that might not have been planned to be on that timeline, right? And so there are going to be some pros and some cons, right? If you talk to any of my friends working in Cambodia, it's not just nonprofits that were benefiting from outreach. It's the entire country has tourism is the biggest income generator for lots of the areas, you know, like of Siem Reap and of Phnom Penh, Banabang. There's a few areas that really benefit from tourism, right? So it's everybody is suffering from this, and there is and like I said, there's also opportunities to rethink things, right? So there are some organizations that I know of that do work like Shoulder to Shoulder that have been trying to raise funds for their community members, because they have communities they would do homestays with, or they would do groups with, and those communities were reliant and had booked, you know, 3 trips out for that year that now have gotten pulled. And so I know people that are trying to raise funds for those groups. I know young people who are really suffering from their lack of tourism jobs, you know, both, you know, in Cambodia and other places. So it's not a black or white. I don't think anyone is going to say that a pandemic is the way to change a system positively in a way that feels like ease and grace. But like I said, I hope that as we go back into these things, okay, now is an opportunity to rethink how things are funded. Now is an opportunity to rethink how we partner. Yeah.
So
Thank
Daniela,
you.
I really appreciate this work, as we're also using the language of learning service now at St. Stephen's St. Agnes School, and giving credit for that time before, during, after, to learn and be more effective, to act. And I wanted to dive into more the differences and the pros and cons of an immersive learning journey and a steady commitment over time to learning service and service learning. And how do we bridge that if the goal of a learning journey that's immersive abroad or even in our backyard is to have this develop a lens that is an ongoing commitment? How do we bridge to that place and a bridge to that possibility of a career in which you're always applying that lens?
And you're the one who teaches, who does social entrepreneurship and service. Is that your school? Is that your role? Okay. Yeah. You sit in my worlds. So I think that's a great question. And that's really where educators, they don't need to be in schools, right? They can be running programs. That's where educators have really the opportunity to think beyond, like I said, that 7-day trip, right? It's what am I asking my students to read and discuss beforehand, right? Like what practices are we setting up that there's like, we're setting up some mindfulness practices so students can like really sit and reflect. We're setting up we use a tool called Open Spaces for Development Education. My colleague Claire Bennett is great with that, but it's just like you sit in a circle, you hear a prompt, or you've gone out into the world and you've watched, in Cambodia, you might have seen part of the trials, the UN tribunals, taking 80-year-old Khmer Rouge leaders to trial, and then you go speak with a young activist filmmaker who thinks truth and reconciliation is the only way rather than spending $500 million on this trial. And there's no right answer, right? And you have these things and you sit down and you say, let's have a 2-hour dialogue, right? Let's create this pattern of how we dialogue. And the way that you do open space for development education is students create questions and then they choose a partner and they have to choose a question that aligns their questions. And then as a bigger group, you just sit for an hour and a half, have a chat, right? And once you've done practices like that for a while, students can like even the second or third time they do it, they're like, okay, I get what I'm doing now. And they can really get to some really deep questioning of their own beliefs and their, how they were raised or what their, communities had told them. I had a group from Texas who were all first generation university students. They were like the most impressive young group of students that we had in Cambodia. And usually we're taking rich kids abroad because their rich school sent them. And this was like, students who, when we talk about orphanages with our rich students, they're like, we don't have an orphanage in my town. And these students were saying, yeah, we got orphanages in our town. We have people that don't have running water. I lived in my car, all these, these things. And their reflections on their own living and then on like religion and what their parents had told them about Buddhists and we had a Buddhist ex-Buddhist monk as the guide and they falling in love with him, and is that okay to these questions, that's what's going to change their lives, right? Is to go back and be like, wow, I am now way more open to loving and being connected to and being interested in people who have these other things. Or I'm recognizing my own lived experience of poverty or of different social injustice or of biases or racism or whatever is a superpower that I can now use to help influence change for other people rather than viewing it as this negative thing. I don't want to talk about it, right? This is a superpower. There's a woman named Baljit Sandhu who writes about the value of lived expertise. So that's something, especially in social entrepreneurship work and service work, rather than treating people like beneficiaries. This is our focus group for our app for farmers we're trying to help. No, they are lived experience leaders. It's our job to elevate their conversation around their needs, right? The way we do that is, what space do we hold? How do we create practices students can repeat? And do we create ongoing courses after this? If we at schools treat it just like a spring break trip, then it becomes just a spring break trip, right? How are you holding them to account? What are their learning goals? Did they get to set learning goals? Are they tracking those goals over time? Are you catching up with them 6 months later saying, how did this trip change any perspectives? How do you want to keep it alive for you, right?
Daniela, unfortunately, the time has gone, but I'd like to try to put it into a little bit of context here, because I see people on the screen, as I said before, that I know, and then I'm sure are thinking, how do I do this in a schedule where people are sprinting into the building at 8 o'clock and they've got a bagel in one hand and books and papers are flying out and they're running to class. And then it's 3 o'clock and they're running to a sports thing and so on. And how is it that I can help my schools see the value of this? And that if we can make time for algebra we need to make time for this. And that is a challenge. It's a challenge for that all of us have. One way, very small way, that we can maybe contribute to this is this session is being recorded. It will be published in the next couple of weeks, and people might want to think about taking this session, at least Daniela's presentation, if not the full conversation, to your colleagues, and bring this conversation to your school and ask these questions of what really is the meaning of community service. How about this, looking at this as learning service, and does our school in its purpose have a place for this? And if it does have a place for this, how are we going to organize it into our, if you will, our priorities? It's a big challenge. There's a real paradox here, and I applaud everybody on the screen. I'm not surprised to see people go quiet, because we have a lot of thinking to do, and you have prompted a discussion here that's so important. So thank you for your good work. Thanks for the well-organized presentation, and for the inspiration for all of us to go forward.
And Bob, just
Thanks.
to add to that, I'll repost the link there in the chat. So Daniela, you mentioned a lot of different things throughout your presentation. So I tried to keep up with you and put the link to your work, Baljeet's work about lived experience, all of that. So if the panelists and attendees want to see those references, they're all in that Google Doc that's linked there.
Great, fabulous, thank you.
Great. All right. Let's go do the good work, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Daniela.
Thank you, ciao.
Daniela.